Looks like we've begun. So, what happens when somebody comes to you with a painting that they allege is a Gunther Gerzso painting, or print, or sculpture? Okay, um, and let's say you may want to have it, and you have the option of inheriting it, or somebody's going to give it to you, or you're going to buy it. How do you know it's authentic? I sometimes use the word real. So I'm Mike Gerzso, the eldest son of Gunther Gerzso, and I've been involved in the art business in a sense because I collaborated with my parents since the mid 70s, off and on, for one reason or another, mostly accounting, legal stuff, administrative stuff. Occasionally, my father would ask me if I liked the painting or not. But it was mostly pragmatic things, and here I am at the situation again. I'm doing this video to help people understand what you have to do, the minimal things you probably have to do to figure out if something is authentic or not. I also should mention that I'm not, let's say, qualified in the academic, certified sense to establish the authenticity of a work. Okay, I'm not a member of the Appraisal Association of the United States or Mexico or a museum or anything else. I'm independent. I manage the Gerzso Archive, which has information about what he did and when he did it. Okay, so I'm off, and I have a website where I mention, the best way to know, or the best way the best way to know if something's authentic or not. All right, and I think I should probably do it. And I came up right now today when I'm now doing the video of kind of a checklist. Okay, and the more things that are checked off, you could say, the better. Some things are more important than others. Okay. The best way, as I say on the website, in principle, in general, is having the paper trail of the ownership of the work and everything you can know about the work when it was made, including the stuff that the artist has. And I can provide additional information about the work if there's something in the record. Okay, so this in the art world is called the provenance of the work, all right? And what it means is, when was the painting done? I'm always going to talk about paintings, when the painting was done, who it was sold to, was it sold to a gallery, was it sold to, a collector, an individual, or did he give it away? Sometimes he would give paintings away. In the 50s, he would do that, and he would not record anything about that. And so sometimes the painting surfaces many years later, and they want to know if it's an authentic painting. Okay. All right. So the complete thing is all the invoices. In Spanish, they call facturas, right? And the factura, not so much how much they paid for it, but the description of the work, the dimensions, it's oil, it's mixed media, it's a print, blah, blah, blah. And a photograph of it in the front and the back. It's very good to have a photograph in the back and also of the frame. These things, if the frame is still on it, the original one, then that also helps to argue that it's authentic. Now, Gerzso in his oil paintings would design or at least specify a frame. So that's something else. It's interesting. So sometimes people say, "Oh, I don't like the frame." They put a new frame on it, which is okay, but at least you should have the record as to what the original frame looked like. Okay. So again, photos, front and back, description, dimensions, media, the whole, as much documentation as possible. And of course, the documentation has to be original, okay? So you can't say, oh, well, here's the painting. I want to know if it's a thing, and I have a copy of, a photocopy, what we used to call a photocopy of Xerox, or a phone copy of the documents, and no, they have to be original. Okay, all right. So now there's another aspect which I personally think that should be taken advantage of more frequently, is that in the mid '60s, Gerzso would always design his painting or his print or his or whatever sculpture. He because since he was a set designer, he had the habit of thinking as a designer. He was he was also a painter. I'm not saying he wasn't a painter, but he kind of meshed these two ways of doing things together, being a designer and being a painter. And he liked to sit down and design his paintings and specify them, very much like an architect does or an engineer does when he's designing an automobile or a bridge or an airplane. Okay, and so in the back here is an example of a design document. It's for rojo, azul, verde. It's done on. This is a reproduction. You can get one of these at the Trident booksellers in Boston if you want. You can also get the reproduction of the painting and then the reproduction of the design drawing. I insist that this is a design drawing because it is an exact layout or design geometrically and everything else of the painting. It's not, some people interpret these as design notes. Okay, well, there are notes on the side, but everything that's here in the design is in the painting. I mean, geometric, not obviously the colors, but the geometry, the proportion of the painting, the actual, layout of every element in the painting. Okay, now, why am I emphasizing this besides, that's interesting? The thing is that it's true in general, not always, but it's true that starting again in the mid '60s, he would do these designs, and he specify, and then in this drawing he would say who he actually sold to. Okay, so this is sort of like the first document as to who the owner was to be or was of this particular work. Okay, and so in general, again, for every painting, sculpture, print, etc., there is a corresponding design document, which is an exact specification of the geometry, the proportion, and the size, right? And another thing about this is that, he numbered the work. So this is painting number 57. A lot of notes I don't understand. Here's the size, and then what kind of primer and gesso he used, okay, when it was started, and when he finished it, and how many sessions he had to complete the painting. So what is the session? Well, the line work, the first colors, the background, and then as he worked up, because in this case, it's an oil painting, so there are many layers, and that's why it has the particular look that it does. It's not just one layer of oil paint, okay, like many painters have done, okay. Just put one layer and that's it, or, one or two, but this is very thin, translucent layers of oil painting, okay. And then here is a log and or a specification of what he wanted to do, all right. And so it says first, pastel, I don't know what. Oh, this is the background, so it's pastel that he used. Okay. So if somebody says, I have a painting, I want to know it's authentic, well, besides all the documentation that I mentioned, is there one of these design drawings? As it is mid '60s on, all right? So I'll just show up a couple of more examples, and then we'll continue to other ways of finding out if it's authentic or not. These are two examples of design drawings. The first one is Ocre Verde Azul. It was done in 1984. And in the top, I redacted it, but in the top is a name of the collector who bought this painting. Now notice that this one's unusual in the sense that he did the design drawing. On the top, it has the dimensions. It's 81 centimeters by 60, all right? And he decided not to use the golden section system of geometry. So this one, he just did the designs, I guess you could say freehand or with some rulers of some sort, or these curves that you can bend around. And then he did a grid, but you can notice that the grid is not, each grid on each side is not evenly spaced, all right? And then he used this, obviously, to transfer this geometry onto the painting. Okay, so this, he said, is started in October 28th, 83, finished in March 1984, all right? Of course, down there it says it read 84, and then it says, above the 84, it says technique, which is the specification and or log of each session of the technique that he used, okay? And in a previous YouTube, I have the color reproduction of this painting, which is also is available at Trident booksellers, cafes, and Boulder. Okay. The next one, assuming that the computer is going to behave, yes. So this one is one that he did. He finished in 98, so 2 years before he died. This is number 503. M is the frame, okay? And here he's using the golden section for the design. In this case, the design is very small. It seems like over time, the design drawings got smaller and the tendency of getting smaller. Okay, and this one is I call it it's mixed media, which means that it's on paper, it's acrylic, I guess there's some oil on it, and pencil, India ink, etc. And you can find out exactly, and pastel, ground up pastel, right? You can find out exactly how he did it, okay? Now, again, if you have something that looks like this, you can check out the geometry, and then if you get really detailed, you can check out the technique, okay? I mean, how the one that's under analysis, does it look like he used techniques as specified here, right? Again, if there's no design drawing or no record, then probably he didn't do the painting. So if you have no documents or a part of the documents and you want to complete the file, then there are options. One of them is, one first step is, you can contact me and I can look in my file to find out if there's a record of the painting and if there's a design document, okay? As I said, before the 60s, the design documents were not as systematic as he did later, right? Then, so I could say, well, yes, the painting does exist, and it was done at such and such a time, and actually, depending upon each case by case, I can figure out whether it's appropriate to give the name of the collector or the people who bought it. The next stage is to contact, the galleries that frequently sold or managed his art. For example, in Mexico is Galería Arte Mexicano, or otherwise known as GAM, and that was probably the first gallery that picked up and exhibiting Gerzso's art. It was established by Inés Amor. She was an extremely well-known person in the cultural world, the art world in Mexico in the 40s and 50s and 60s, okay, and the descendants and other people of Inés Amor have the gallery now. It still exists in Mexico, and they have an extensive archive. So they can, now whether they're willing to give you information or not, because it's a private outfit. All right, another gallery. There are a bunch of other ones. I'm just winging it from memory. There's Misraki. There was the small gallery, Rosita Baligay. There was a woman called Davidoff who also had a gallery. Those are the ones I remember offhand. And then later there was Ramon Lopez Quiroga, and he was the gallery in Mexico up until his death. Here in the United States, the ones that managed the most, I'm not saying that others didn't, is primarily Marianne Martin in New York and Latin American Masters in Los Angeles. And then there's Virginia Miller in Florida. I've had a couple of contacts with her. Now they may have a record, if you have a painting that you might think that they sold at one point, they probably have a record of it. Another option is the auction houses in New York, Sotheby's and Christie's. They've sold paintings over the years, probably since the early 60s, maybe earlier. They have catalogs, physical catalogs. I've seen them of each year and what they auction. Sometimes they emphasize his work on the cover of the catalog. In Mexico, there's Lopez Morton, which I know of, and I know they sell Gerzso paintings. I don't have any experience with them. I don't have any opinion one way or another, but they do appear on the internet. Okay, these are the covers of the most important books on Gunther Gerzso and or catalogs. The top one on the left is the catalog of his first one-man show at the Institute of Fine Arts of the government of Mexico, called Instituto Nacional de Bellas Artes. So that has the images that you can consult. The whole point of the knowing about these books is that they have many images or reproductions of his work. So it's between all of them, it's kind of a catalog of his lifetime work, although it's not comprehensive. The next one in the middle, the black cover, is by Luis Carlos y Aragon. And this was maybe the first book on his work, dedicated to his work, and it was published by the National University of Mexico. The next one over on the right is, I would say, the first high quality art book published on his work, and it was sponsored or in a collaboration with the Marianne Martin Gallery in New York. It has two articles one by John Golding, who was a friend of Gunther Gerzso's and an expert on Cubism. He lived in England, but he lived in Mexico sometime. And then Octavio Paz, which we never tire reminding people that he is a Nobel Prize winning poet. But he was also a friend of the families. Both of these guys were friend of the families. Probably because before they became super famous. Okay, now assuming the computer is going to cooperate, we'll move down to the next one. Next row, which is Gunther Gerzso by Rita Ede. You can barely see her name at the top left. This was done after Neuchâtel, and it was emphasizing sort of the interpretation or aspect of the waltz. Okay, but again, they're reproductions of his work that are newer, I think, than the Neuchâtel one. The Gunther Gerzso one, Risking the Art of the Middle, it's done by Dana Dupont and et al. And as I said, all these I mentioned, these are listed on my website. This is probably the most comprehensive book on his work and his life, the influences and all this kind of stuff. okay, and has the most complete bibliography of all the articles and books that are written on him, all his exhibitions, etc. Okay, and this is a book I go to all the time when I want to find something about, about him, about, the name, the title or the name of a painting or a print. Okay, it's easier sometimes to look it up here, since they based this data on our archive, the family archive. So, and in general, I've verified that it's pretty correct. The red one was in collaboration with the Latin American artists, Latin American masters in Los Angeles, and Ramon Lopez Quiroga Gallery, Mexico. And it has an article by Dory Ashton. If that name doesn't mean anything to you, then you should look it up. She was an important person in the New York art scene at one point. All right. The next row down, we will move here. What's this? The next row down. I don't know this book, Zona Silencio. Maybe I have it in the archive. It's done by the government publishing company called Fondo Cultura Económica. And it's on, it's like many books that are published on them, and people focus on one thing or another, and again, they reproduce images, so that could be a source. Okay, in this case, it's Ricardo Martinez, the painter, who we knew, and then Luis Garcia Guerrero, who was a friend of the family's, and he was a very interesting painter too. The one in the middle is a book which in this case may not be relevant, but is interesting, is what he did in the movie business and the theater. It is everything that he did when he was not a painter. All right. And so, and this was done by, again, part of one of the Mexican cultural entities that they had, Onaculta, or the National Archive of the Movies, Cineteca, or it's all these people collaborated and do it. They did a very good job. It's Itala Schmeritz is the person who did this. And then, then the last one is sort of like one of many magazines that were published on his work, and they also have images. Okay, the last thing in the checklist that we saw is consulting the various publications to see if the painting that you have in your hand or the work that you have in your hand is similar to anything published. And if it is, at least you got the, let's say, style or look that's consistent, okay? Of course, he also did some experimental paintings and stuff which had nothing to do with anything else that's in the publication, so that's possible too. But if it's similar, then you're on the right track, all right? The next thing on the checklist is looking at the painting physically, and this is the situation when people send me an email, an image. Well, it's it could be an image of who knows what it looks like physically. What's it painted on? It's hard to tell from photographs. And also the finish, the texture, the look of the actual paint when you actually see it. Okay. But there are sort of basic common sense things that you can do. And then if you want to know with greater certitude what it is that that has to be done, then you can get a specialist and do even chemical analysis. But even before you do that, it's just certain basic common sense things you should consider. For example, Gerzso painted on the third floor of his house, and to get materials in and out of the house, going up on the third floor, you had to go through narrow hallways and stairs. So it was, he was not a person who was committed to a huge canvas or a size. He was, very practical, and he And also to actually paint the painting, you wanted something more or less this size. This painting here is 65 centimeters by 50, so you're gonna have to figure out what that is in inches, but basically it's something like this. Okay, it's very rare to have something like this. Okay, or very rare to have a painting the size of Ricardo Martinez, which was the subject of that book. You know, one of the last books in the image for the cover of the books. Okay, he used to have paintings, I think, that were like 6 feet, 7 feet wide, and I don't know how many. I mean, they were huge canvases. Gerzso never did anything like that. Okay, the biggest he got was maybe 4 feet, 3.5 feet. Okay, um, but most of them were, you know, this big. Okay, 3 feet maybe. Okay, would be a big one. Most of them were like this. All right. And for practical reasons. The other thing is he liked to paint on masonite. So painting on masonite, have some really big sheet. It's, you know, it's very hard to handle. Okay. And they're heavy. Okay. That's one advantage of canvases because they're lighter. Right. Now, when canvas, in the early years, I don't know what he used, but in the later years, he used, you know, very, very good canvas. And he would do the stretching himself. Maybe in the early years he got stuff that was previously stretched, but later he would get the material, and he would get the frame, or what's called the stretchers, or whatever they call the frame, and he would stretch the canvas on it. And in later years he had an assistant, and I remember that they have a special table there. If you see the image in the homepage of the website, there's a table there, and that's where they used to do the stretching. And they had, you know, tacks, and they used to tack the thing. They didn't have staples, and that's a technique to stretch. Okay, you have to know what you're doing, and they did it, and he did it. Okay, so that's, you know, that's something else. In the early years, and later years, but in the early years, he would paint on what they call illustration board, which is a cardboard. But most of the time he didn't. Okay. Um, I mean, the most detailed stuff, I'm looking at my notes here. The most detailed stuff is on my website. All right. Now, the other thing is that he always painted on the same easel. As far as I remember as a kid, he always painted on in the same place on the same easel. And he prepared his paintings in a special room with special techniques. Okay. So again, he had a door, a normal door, and it was a small room, it was sort of like the size of a large closet. And that's where he used to do the gesso and the background color and stuff like that. So to get it in and out, well, you can only have something so big. And then he had a table. The table is, the size of a kitchen table, and that's where he used to do sort of the foundation stuff, right? To talk about painted sizes, oil painting material, okay? Well, this is where you get into the technical stuff, the chemistry, and specialists know about this. But I know that he always liked to have the best oil, the best materials. And not only that, as a kid when I was in high school, we used to come to the States and buy him Liquitex matte medium and Liquitex gesso and other acrylics materials. Okay, and so that's another thing. Now, if everything looks good, all right, and you say, well, I still want to know if this is really, everything checks out. So he got the provenance, the original documents. It looks like something that's been done, that appears in the publications. It's the right size. It's the right material. Okay. It has notations on the back. It has the right frame. But is it really, really, really an authentic painting? Okay. Well, the next step is you have to do chemical analysis. Okay. And then you have to get, people who know how to do this. Okay, now all of a sudden, this is, outside the realm of everyday people. I have no idea how this is done, but I know it's done. I mean, a typical thing is this painting could not have been painted by so and so because they didn't make that paint when he painted, kind of thing. Okay? Or, you know, it has acrylic gesso, but he never used acrylic gesso. I mean, I'm not talking about Gerzso, but just as an example. Okay? Uh, so that's the chemical analysis would determine that. Okay? But in the end, okay, then I mentioned mix, and in the end, you know, you don't have a guarantee, so you have to say, okay, I think this is real, and that's it. Okay, you do the best you can, and then you take the risk. You want to buy something that may remotely be possibly not authentic. I mean, everybody goes through this, so right, but you do the best you can. So, but again, I think the fundamental thing is trust. Uh, the most trustworthy gallery, the most trustworthy auction houses, okay, etc. The best documentation, all that obviously makes a good case that something is authentic, okay, all right. But the people who contacted me by email don't usually, never have done that. They say, here's an image. Usually it's the front of the painting. Can you tell me if he did it? Or can you, you know, certify that he did it? Okay, we want me to certify stuff. Okay, and I'm going to get certification in a minute. All right, and no, you need to do all this stuff. Okay, now some people, you know, you could have something that's imitating his style. Okay, I mean, it could look somewhat like his work. Okay, all right, so. Mixed media materials, well, usually it's, you know, a paper, like a watercolor paper. He stretches it on a board, and then he does the background, similar to what he does in oil. But it's basically acrylic. It probably could have some oil. I mean, I don't know. The other thing is that he was always developing and modifying and adjusting his technique all the time. And then the logs here is an indication of that work. Okay, so some things they made on 1 year, then later he decided he didn't like to do that. You learn more and more about the technique. Okay, let me consult more of my notes here. Now, the last thing has to do with certification. People, when they email me, they want to know if a particular painting is authentic, and in some cases, they want me to certify that it's authentic. Okay, so what I can do is look in the archive, and I can state in a letter that there is a painting that has a certain title, done on a certain date, or sculpture, or whatever, if I have the records. And the dimensions, and I can provide the photo of the photo that I have. Many times it's only black and white, and if it's color, I can provide color. Most of the time I do it free of charge, but if it's, you know, depends on the future, maybe I'll change the policy, my policy. So that's all I can do. I cannot, you know, based on just an image, a photo of something which looks like a painting, which could be the authentic painting, not state whether it's an authentic painting. I can only state that there is a record of such a painting in the archive. And as I say, you know, people rarely ask about the design drawing. So another thing is you could say, well, is there a design drawing? Okay. The idea is that they're trying to complete their documentation on a work, all right? It's not my job because I don't have the capability of doing it, okay? So this comes to the next thing about certification. Some people ask me to certify a painting, and a lot of them, a couple of them, you know, want me to do it just based on an image, okay? Now, I will never certify anything for a simple reason is that I'm not a member of any association which has a recognized authority in the area of art or in law enforcement, okay? To me, certificate, this is my understanding from everyday experience, certification is a process in which you determine, or it is determined, that something complies with certain requirements to be certified. Okay, so there's an agreed upon a set of requirements and procedures to determine whether something complies to some criteria. So, you know, if you get married, there are certain things you have to comply with, certain requirements, age, other things, okay? And a certificate for airworthiness, the same thing. There is a standard agreed set of procedures to determine that something is airworthy, and the entity that in the United States does it is the FAA, okay? Anybody else who comes around and says, well, I think this thing is airworthy and I'm going to give a piece of paper certifying, I don't think it doesn't have any legal basis, okay? So since I have no legal basis, or I'm not board certified by, let's say, the Authentication Bureau Board of, the state of Colorado, United States. I mean, it doesn't make any sense for me to do a certificate. Okay, so I'm getting too much in the details. Now, maybe in the art world this is done. I mean, I've never seen a certificate in the sense that I'm talking about, okay? Now, one thing that is possible and acceptable is that they can, you can get a letter from somebody saying, yes, this work, to the best of my knowledge and understanding, is an authentic work, and this is why. Okay, when I sell a print, okay, or other paintings, I will state that, as far as I know, it's an authentic work by Gunther Gerzso because I got it out of his studio and I saw it many times in my life. So, but it's not a certification. Okay. Just as an aside, I mean, there are programs where you can see how this works. If you're not familiar, in the United States, you can probably go on the internet, there's the PBS, Antiques Roadshow. They get experts together and they say, yes, this is a real Ming vase, and I've been looking at Ming vases all my life, and we've done we know the material, this kind of thing, okay? And the one that we like a lot, my family, is Pawn Stars, PANW Stars, and all sorts of crazy things come into that store. It's in Las Vegas, and one of the guys, the partner, is an expert on Greek coins. So you give him a Greek coin, he can pretty much tell if it's real or not, okay? Prints, books, rare books, all sorts of things. Records, vinyl records, mint condition Star Wars figures, kind of thing. And baseballs, that Babe Ruth signed this baseball or not. And the question always comes up over and over again, do you have the paperwork? So here it's the same thing, all right? And then the routine always is, can I call in an expert to look at this? And then the expert comes in and says, yes, this, the best of my knowledge and my expert opinion, this is a real mint condition Star Wars figure of Darth Vader, okay? I mean, I'm not kidding. This is what happens on this program, all right? So, so the other thing that a lot of people get confused with is the difference between an authentic work, what I call a semi-authentic work, and a copy and a reproduction. Okay, I covered this on the YouTube on prints, okay, that I did. It's episode 2, I think. And an authentic work is, it's done by the artist, in this case, Gunther Gerzso. It's an authentic print, which the criteria I mentioned before in the other video. He signed it. It's, it's understood that it is an authentic for whatever reason. It has documentation. It has a history. It's been in exhibitions. It has in books. It's been owned by reputable collectors, etc. What we've talked about before, right? Semi-authentic could be, well, my understanding is there is a painting that we know, there is a painting that was done by Gunther Gerzso, and there are witnesses who can state that this is an authentic Gunther Gerzso, and they may have seen him paint it, or they may have seen him give it to somebody or sell it to somebody, but other than that, there's no documentation, and it's entirely, and in some cases, he didn't sign it. Okay, so didn't appear in any exhibitions. It doesn't appear in any books. Gerzso has some of those, not a lot, and those appear usually the ones that he did in the 1940s, 1930s, 40s, and 50s. And later he got more systematic in keeping records. All right. Now, some people have a painting like that. Some people in the past have had a painting like that. Then they went back to him and say, did you do this painting? And even though you didn't sign it, did you do this painting? And he says, yes, I did. Then not only that, sometimes he actually signed it. And then he writes a letter. This is the painting I did, and I gave it to so-and-so, or I sold it to so-and-so, kind of thing. And I know as particular cases like that. Then people have contacted me saying, do you know about this painting? And I said, yes, I know. Not only that, I saw that painting when I was a kid, all right, in the owner's house. All right. Copy. You have to talk to your lawyers about this, and this is true, in the United States and other countries, is, you can paint, you can make a copy of the work using the same techniques, but it has to have a different size. Okay, so comparing to the size of the painting that's registered, you can tell immediately that it's not authentic, but it's a copy, and it could be a very good copy, and it's okay. I don't think there's a problem with that. All right. A reproduction. This is a reproduction. Take a photo of it, blow it up, print it, inkjet, put it in a book, kind of stuff. Right. This is non-craft type item. And then the last thing is, I'm going to call it not authentic. All right. We will leave it at that. And there's a long history of not authentic, things that purport to be authentic and that are not. Okay. And there are those around. So that's another thing, is buyer beware. All right. So, and then I'll finish. It's like somebody comes up to you and said, you want to buy this Gucci bag. Okay. And it only costs $10 and it's real. Well, if you like the Gucci bag and you don't care if it's real or not, then that's okay. All right. But if you really want a real one, I'm just mentioning Gucci bags. It could be other things, watches, scarves, even automobiles. Okay. There's some automobiles that are reproductions, and then people want to pass them off as something that was originally manufactured by, let's say, Bugatti or something. Right? So, buyer beware. Documentation. Know your stuff. Look at the books. The internet has tons of stuff. Right? Call up the galleries. If they take your call, it can be a help. All right? All right, I hope this is a help. Thank you very much. And we are out of here.